So our next panel, we are going to be talking about the longest running Transformer show in history, which is really awesome. So 4 complete seasons. We're going to be talking about Rescue Bots. Can we get Jim Rescue Bots? Awesome. So please welcome to the stage Brian Orfeld and Nicole Dubuque. Oh, I'm going to get it wrong now. I've asked you. Dubuque. Thank you.
Yeah, we brought these jackets to wear. Maybe not the welding one. I don't know.
Do you want to hold up the jacket? It's too warm to wear those, I agree. Do you want to hold these up? Oh, these are really cool.
Yeah, those are all the names are in Cybertronium. We got a Griffin Rock patch on the side.
This is really awesome.
Anyway, they're often too hot to wear in California as well. So
Is there a story behind the jackets?
they sit very nicely in the closet.
Did everybody get one who's worked? Is it just you two?
Brian, myself, and Frank, our supervising director and also producer, we all paid and got them for the team because I feel like everybody needs a cast jacket.
It used to be kind of a studio or show tradition that everyone would get crew jackets, but they don't do that anymore. So we like to just keep the tradition up, so we just do it ourselves.
That's awesome. I like that a lot. Yeah, nice. That's cool. I really love it. Okay, so for those who don't know, could you very briefly introduce yourself and tell us what specifically on the Rescue Bots what you did, what was your role?
Sure. So I'm Nicole Dubuque. I'm an animation writer, and I came first to the Transformers world with Transformers Prime when the Hub Network was getting started there. And after a season on that, Jeff Klein, our producer, decided that he was going to develop this other show, As We're As for a Younger Show. And he brought me over to develop it with Brian Holfeld and also Jeff Klein. And together we developed this show, made the show. I was a story editor for 3 seasons on the show as well as a writer, and then I moved into the executive producer role when Brian stepped down to be a story editor in season 4.
Yes, I'm Brian Holfeld, and I'd worked with Jeff and Nicole on a show at Disney Junior, My Friends Tigger and Pooh, that I developed and created. And I think Jeff, I had no Transformers experience whatsoever, but Jeff, since it was a younger show, Jeff tapped me because that's sort of my wheelhouse. And we kind of all came up with it together, but the way I remember it is like you did everything. That's just the way I remember it.
That's because I whisper that in your ear at night. I did everything.
Honestly, I know that she wrote a fantastic pilot. I mean, we all developed the story together and everything. And at the time, the Hub, the network was a little hesitant that this brand, the toy company, the studio, wanted to have both shows on the air, Prime and Rescue Bots. And the Hub was hesitant. They thought that they would be diluting the brand by having more than one show on the air, so they didn't want to make Rescue Bots, and we really had to convince them. That's right, when we started, it wasn't a done deal. We were developing Rescue Bots and another toy that Hasbro owned called Billy Blastoff, which would have been a great show. Greg Jackson and I developed that while you and Jeff were focusing on Rescue Bots. Billy Blastoff kind of became Miles from Tomorrowland.
It's the same kind
It's the same. I mean, it didn't officially, but Miles from Tomorrowland was basically what the same show Billy Blastoff would have been. But anyway, we developed for a while. We created the world. We were handed the toys by Hasbro, the 4 toys, and just said, create something.
Yeah, and we also do voices on the show. Brian plays Mr. Bunty.
No, I don't play Mr. Bunty. I play Mr. Pfeiffer the baker. This is where it gets confusing.
Oh, sorry. He plays Mr.
My image is used for
Mr.
Bunty. Steve Bloom voices him. But I play the baker, Mr. Pfeiffer.
Mr. Pfeiffer, that's right.
Who sells the birthday cake and Little White Lies.
Yes. Yeah. The plot point of the cake.
But yeah, I guess that's... But Family of Heroes was a good title for this panel because it always was kind of the idea that there's 2 families. There's the Rescue Bot family who are new to Earth and learning everything, and the human family who are teaching them. But over the course of 4 seasons, they all become, or actually over 1 season, they become one big family. And of course, the thing that we had to keep in mind when developing it was there are no Decepticons. And it was a conscious choice we made because it was a younger screen show. And I was wondering, when they started it, it was definitely called Pre preschool because the toys were preschool. But then it started skewing a little older. When did that happen?
Yeah, so the Hub did this kind of cool thing that they focused on this bridge entertainment area. And so usually preschool, they say, is 3 to 5. And then bridge is 4 to 7. And then 6 to 11 is kind of the older stuff you might see. So My Little Pony was kind of falling in the spot of bridge. And that came before Rescue Bots. And so then when we were starting, they're like, yeah, this bridge area, we really like that. So we were able to tell kind of slightly older stories, have a lot more humor in it than you would say in just like straight preschool like a Dora or something like that. And I think that that's what we really enjoyed about it. And for us, getting the chance to dive into those characters kind of away from the war and see what day-to-day life would be with them, it almost became kind of like an adventure sitcom a little bit, and I think that that was just delightful to work on. One of the things that they said, we were kind of like the trifecta writing this, because it was Brian, me, and Greg Johnson, and they would say, well, Brian would bring the heart, and Greg would bring the action-adventure, and I would bring the comedy, and so you should hopefully feel all of those things in each episode of Rescue Bots, this fusion of our brains. So, fingers crossed.
Well, I personally think it worked really well. I don't know, I'm a huge Rescue Bots fan, and yeah, when you mention, oh, there are no Decepticons, you're like, oh, you're right, there aren't any, but you don't miss, like, I love Decepticons, but you don't miss them.
Yeah, I'm glad you say that, because a lot of people were like, we won't watch it, when we watch this, it's not really Transformers, it doesn't have Decepticons. So we kind of changed the definition of what a Transformer could do. And rescue, this was rescue, rescue, rescue. And if you think coming up with a new rescue 104 times is easy, oh my gosh.
I have to admit, like, whenever there's a new natural disaster I haven't heard of, I get excited.
When we discovered, what was it, fire tornadoes? Whoa, that was great. That was wonderful. I said, we have something new we hadn't heard of. It's wonderful. It's too bad they're not around to deal with climate change. I think they could.
Season 5 that never was climate change. Because it reminds me, some of the rescues reminds me of Thunderbirds in a lot of ways. I don't know if that was an influence, but I grew up with a lot of Thunderbirds, and it's like, oh, it's you know, the heroes against tragedy or disaster, or you know, someone accidentally cut a cable and this happened, rather than like, oh, we've got to stop the bad guy. I think that's really
we had some bad guys. We had villains eventually, Dr. Morocco and Evan and Miles. We talk about the naming a little bit. It's a very personal show for all of us, and I think that's why people like it. It is a very human show. It's very individual. It's like somebody wrote it. You can tell, like, somebody wrote this, not just a committee, but somebody.
I think, yeah, you mean like choices were made. Like, there's a reason for that.
And again, I probably sound effusive complimenting her much, but her pilot was just like, it nailed it. It created the world, it created the characters. All in 22 minutes to set up the whole shebang.
We're already married. You don't have to keep courting me.
I know, but who wrote part 2? You did that too,
so
right?
I don't know, maybe this is interesting to you, it's interesting to me. The pilot that I wrote for this show was way too long. It was about 45 pages. And I was like, so, what should we do about this? And Jeff Klein was like, you have 2 episodes here, so you just need to split them. Well, you can't just split an episode, so it turned out to be kind of a restructure of both. But that the next one with the lava in the sewers turned out to be, that was originally in the first part of the...
You know, that's interesting, because originally our plan was that the humans, the Burns family, would not know that they were Transformers except for Cody until the end of season 1. And I guess it was Jeff who said that's just not sustainable, do it in episode 2.
Right. And it's fun because we keep the robots in disguise from the rest of the town up until the last season, so we still get to play with that, and then it's almost more fun to see our humans stumbling around trying to protect the identity as well.
Yeah, and seeing them trying to act like robots was always fun, and we had a lot of humor there.
Yeah.
It's interesting you said about ponies. I hadn't thought about that, but if it hadn't been for the success of the reboot of My Little Pony on the Hub, I don't think we would have gotten that bridge, because I think they understood it was going to be the same kind of tone, the same audience, so that did help. We kind of had to barrel it through. I think the other breakthrough was when, I think it was Jeff's idea, I mentioned this at the other panel, the idea of tech gone wrong, that they live on an island of experimental tech, and Dr. Green is always inventing these things that go haywire. Not always, sometimes they work, but it just made for a nice, fertile story ground.
I'm going to jump back to one thing really fast, and that was he was talking about names. So,
right.
Haley and Taylor, who appear in the show, those are the names of Greg Johnson's kids. Miles and Evan are
It was Jeff's nephews that we had to have them.
Had to have them. Another fun story about Miles and Evan. They originally both had voices. And Jeff didn't like their characters. He didn't like the dialogue. My nephews have to see this. I don't like this. And I didn't have time to write 2 sets of dialogue, so I'm like, fine, one of them doesn't speak. And so that's how that came about.
It worked good. We saved an actor too. Graham was named after my son. Kate was named after her nephew.
Danielle is my middle name. So yeah, basically, if you're a writer, just name things after everyone you know.
Who was the 4th one? Oh, Cody. Cody was the name they gave us. It was Cody Franklin?
Franklin was what we tried, but Burns had legal clearance, because everything has to go through legal clearance, right? So sometimes you have names for characters, and then it's like, yeah, guess what? You got to re-report all of that because it didn't clear legal. And Blades originally had a Z at the end of his name.
I remember I did not like Burns because it's hard to say. Burns. Whereas Franklin is just like Franklin. You know, and it has that American thing going on. Yeah.
I think Burns to me sounds, when you say it, American accent sounds quite American.
It was just like a
Burns.
Oh yeah. So I'm sorry, you actually have questions for us, and we could honestly
No, this is the easiest kind of panel, because I just sit and absorb all the information. I don't have to ask you a strict set of questions. I do have some though. So, how familiar? Obviously, Prime was going on at the same time. I'm assuming you were writing and involved with that. Before Rescue Bots / Prime, how familiar were you both with the Transformers world, that legacy world, really?
Yeah.
How much research did you have to do?
Sure, well, I watched G1 growing up, so I had that kind of always living in the back of my brain, and then I watched a little bit of Beast Wars when that was on, and then Prime was kind of, they were doing the aligned continuity, was the new concept that they were going to be doing at the time, and so they handed us this book, and it was like, this is what's setting up your continuity, and almost immediately in the writer's room after we all read this, we're like, well, we have different ideas, so that was the beginning of the splintering of the aligned continuity in the writer's room at Prime. But what we did on Prime was we had, I think, maybe 3 weeks of writer's room to start, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, just talking about what we want to do with the show, who are our favorite bots, what did we like about the different incarnations from before, and I never saw the giant document that Hasbro keeps. I know Dwayne and Jeff did, but all of that knowledge was there for our asking if we needed it, and Aaron Archer was still around to ask questions too. So that was kind of what happened.
Explain who he was for those of us who don't know.
I mean, he's just kind of the guru of all things, the keeper of knowledge of all things Transformers for Hasbro. I don't know what his official title was. I just kind of was always like, that's the guy who knows.
And what was his fate?
What's that?
What was his fate?
He's no longer with the company.
So about 3 or 4 years ago, apparently, this is just, I don't know, I'm just assuming as someone who works at Hasbro, that they kind of lost interest in the backstory of Transformers and of everything that had happened in that Bible. Just kind of got overlooked, and it was like anything goes, which, okay, it's a choice. And I think on some shows like Earthspark, I don't know, but it feels like that's continuing more the traditional.
I won't say anything about it.
Earthspark. Say anything. We barely can mention the name. Earthspark. I was going to say.
So when it came, obviously we touched a little bit on this in your panel yesterday. These guys are in a panel every single day this weekend. Top guests, must say. You obviously pitched for this. How much of the world of Griffin Rock existed in that initial pitch, and how much of it changed once you had input on what the direction for the show was?
I don't think it changed much, right?
It didn't change much. No, some of the names changed. Blades was originally spelled with a Z. That's like one of the big changes. But like the entire, Nicole's crazy about griffins and everything she does, so that's why we named the town Griffin Rock. It was a combination of Eagle Rock, where I lived at the time, a suburb of LA, and Griffin. But yeah, no, it was the world kind of just sprung up. It was amazing how it happened. It was really great. It's unique that happens. But I think it was just the team. We had all worked together before. It was a great. The rule we have on every show we always work on when we're in charge and can say so. No jerks allowed. So we just try to put together a team, and Jeff Klein is great at that, putting together a team just to get a show going. We were talking about this yesterday, how amazing it is that he developed in Prime, and it won an Emmy the first year the Hub existed as a network, which is just unheard of. But they kind of thought, oh, okay, yeah, he did that, he can do it again, and we don't need it. Now we know how to do it.
Yeah, I think also what helped on Rescue Bots was that we knew who the characters were and we loved them. And when you're going to have to spend hours and hours and hours of your life with these characters, you better love them and know them well.
Yes.
And so writing for this show was a joy in that sense of you could always find a way into the story by a character's perspective. And I think that that's always the key to when you have a series that maybe gets more seasons. And a lot of times it's just whether or not the network says yes or no. But for the writers, the way we can keep the legs on the series is characters that have a perspective. And I think that's why My Little Pony also works so well. You had a dynamic of characters who knew who they were, and then you, the audience, would know immediately if they approached a situation, oh, this is going to be funny because I know how they're going to react. So.
Yeah, one of my favorite episodes that I wrote from season 1 was Little White Lies. And basically the story is Chase and Chief get trapped in a cavern and they get saved by the other ones. But I wanted to make it was kind of like a waiting for Godot. But the original was I needed to do a bottle show, which is the term for when you make a very small scale so you can save on assets, to design a lot of new sets. So we figured, cave background would be pretty easy. But it just became this like really great scenes between Chief and Chase. Kind of, it was only the 5th episode, so they're getting to know each other, and it's just, I don't know, it's just character. It was just, how can we approach this through the character? We've seen a cave-in rescue a million times. How can we make it for these characters? It was also influenced by How Green Was My Valley. It was comedy. I don't know if you guys know that, but the cave-in and that influenced that as well. Oh, and music. Can we talk about music for a second before we do the musical? The other thing that changed, there wasn't kind of a sea change at the end of season 1 when Hasbro wasn't sure they were going to make it anymore. And it was very successful, but they wanted to spend less money, of course. So that's when Jeff Klein stepped down and kind of kicked in his portion of the Rescue Bot salary into the budget of the show. He kept working on Prime, and then we kind of took over Rescue Bots. But part of the deal with that was we had to get new composers. And Jeff and Star Parody did the first season. Man, they're just so great. They're just such beautiful themes. And then we hired another composer by the name of Christopher Ellis, who was fantastic too. He was in Australia. He's British, but lives in Australia. So all of our sessions that had to do with editing and composing and everything we had to do over the computer, over online. And there's a thing that composers don't like to use other composers' work because it cuts down on their residuals, which, I can understand. So eventually, we said to him, we have to keep some of these themes. They're recognizable to the audience. They're perfect for the show. We have to keep some of them. Over the course of three years that they did, it became more and more his, which is fine. It became a different kind of thing. It was less action, it was more cinematic, but it still worked great. But they both did such wonderful jobs.
They did, and I don't know if you know this, but when we sit down as a producer with the show, we have a meeting with the composer, we talk them through, like, here's the emotion we're hoping to feel at this point, or like, oh, this is a misdirect. It'd be great if you had, a comedy cue here and a sting here. And so you get to work with the composer and kind of create that audio tapestry of what you're supposed to feel when you're watching, and it really makes a difference. We were listening to the Prime soundtrack the other day while we were waiting for something to start, and it's just, that still gets me. It's so good.
That kind of thing is great, and our lyrics to it as well.
I'm not going to sing my lyrics to the Transformers Prime theme song.
Hey, we've all done it.
Oh, okay, I will.
Go on, please do.
I am Optimus Prime. I am really cool. I become a truck.
So, of course, that led us to, we have to do a Rescue Bots musical. So we're talking about this briefly and introduce a clip, but we did the musical in season 4, or season 3 rather, I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with it. And we wanted to do it for a long time, mostly because we had the cast, we had some great singers. We had Lacey Chabert, who was in Broadway on Les Mis, and who was in Mean Girls, and not the musical, but Parv is a really good singer. Bloom is good. Everybody was good. There was a couple of clunkers, but we didn't give them much to do. But so we needed a story to justify this. Why is everybody singing? So we made it the Tech Gone Wrong. Doc Green invents this tono tuner, kind of an auto tuner, but instead of just fixing the pitch, it is broadcast accidentally throughout the town, and everybody just is forced to sing. Whenever they open their mouth to talk, it comes out singing. So we did that show,
we were a little bit inspired by, you know, the Buffy episode, Once More with Feeling? Like, I thought they did that so well, an in-show reason for this to happen. So that's what we were trying to do. What's the Griffin Rock reason?
Yeah. And we overwrote it. I wrote too much music. Nicole and I wrote songs along with Chris Alves. He wrote some of the music for, because we got overwhelmed. It was a big, ambitious project, and it took us a long time to do it. And we had too much material. They kept telling me, "Oh, you're going to have too much material," and I kept saying, "Oh, no." But they were right. So we cut a lot. Some of it was cut before we even boarded it. Some of it was cut after boarding. And we're going to show a clip. Tomorrow we're going to show that I've reconstructed the entire episode to put in the missing 5 minutes or so, whatever. We cut out 5 or so.
Yeah, the uncut version.
Huh?
Yeah,
so we're going to show that tomorrow, but we have a short clip that we'd like to play now.
Yeah, so we're going to show just
it's a 2-minute clip
music episode now.
Of a song that was cut. And it's funny because this song is like the third act thing where everything turns, where they decide they're going to work together. Kate and Heatwave have been arguing the whole time. And it kind of led to the big turnaround, but we cut it. But I did learn putting it back together. I think all the stuff we cut were good choices.
Yeah, Brian played the music that didn't exist to make this happen. That's your man living in there, right?
Oh, some of it's demo, yeah. Most of it's the demo. There was one verse that they sing that was played under the credits at the end of it, which was full orchestrated, but everything else is just me playing on the demo.
Okay,
So
should we watch it?
We'll roll it.
Roll the tape.
Sorry, Chief, but go on without me. My partners may keep this job pretty tough.
So it's my fault? Fine, I won't go either. Until this thing is through, I've had enough.
Just ignore me.
That's what I was doing.
Act like you don't know me.
Wish that were true. Tiny counterfoil. I don't care, I'm telling you I'm through.
Buckle down now. We have a job here. Don't let this get the best of you.
Your dad's right. Kate, Heatwave, you're rescue workers. Just get out there, do what you do best.
May I remind you that you took an oath as a rescue bot.
And the people that you're saving don't care if you're singing or not.
And one thing more than we should keep in mind. Remember, kids, the song we sang together all the time.
There's nothing stronger than the sea that ties and bind the family. When the winds go high and the rains come down, your loved ones take you back to the ground. Our family tree grows safe and deep and sound. The sweetest music has to be our voices joined in harmony. They rise like birds above the ground and fill the air with melodies unbound. Our family tree is nourished by the sound.
So there you have it. Never seen
Wow.
before.
I've seen it before.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Sure thing,
So,
yeah.
as just mentioned, during the kids quiz tomorrow, I can't remember what time it is, the full episode will be shown with that part included in its correct place. So if you want to watch the whole episode, do go on to the kids quiz. There will then be a kids quiz just for children, I'm afraid, based on that episode, but please come along just to watch it. You're very, very welcome, of people of all ages. But no, that's great. And am I right in thinking that's the only, looking if we've got Chris McFeely in the room, is that the only musical, there we go, he's me somewhere. Is that the only musical episode we've ever had in Transformers?
Yes.
That's incredible. I mean,
I think that was part of the appeal, was like we would be the first to do one.
yeah, because some franchises have them, don't they? You know, they have a classic, clip-only episode.
It was the era when everybody was doing one, so we had to.
That's amazing.
And it's my turn to brag on Brian because this was really his brainchild and he worked very hard on it. He's a fantastic composer as well as a lyricist. So as you hear, like I said, he was playing the music in there for the stuff we hadn't recorded just to put this together for this program. So kudos to you.
Oh, no, it existed before, but I looked when we have scripts available, but I was looking at the date, and I finished it 5 days before our wedding. And you were gone already. You had left to go to, remember Miles by then?
Yes, he doesn't mean I was gone, like, away from the wedding. I was on a different show.
She left me at the altar.
No, yeah, it's very memorable. I turned in we thought season 3 would be the last episode of Rescue Bots, and so I, like, sent from the airport the last draft of that finale.
And we had just recorded the last song 2 days before the wedding.
So we said all of our goodbyes, this wonderful story in the show, and then about 6 months later, Hasbro's like, so hey, how about a season 4?
Yeah, the season 3 two-part finale, we wrote it because we thought we were pretty sure the show wasn't coming back for another season, so it's a really emotional kind of goodbye.
Weeping while writing that one, you know,
Yeah.
you really love your characters, they become like your children or your family. You know, I still carry them with me. Like if I could hear Chase in my head and what he would say any given day. You know. So.
Our cast is just amazing. I can't say enough. I mean, so much of the success is owed to them, of course, as always. But just the way that we all could work together and inform what they were doing, informed our writing informed their performances. And it was just kind of a nice feedback loop. That, it was great. I'm always stunned. Like Maurice LaMarche. He even said this is like one of the few jobs he's had where he's gotten to use his own voice because he's just playing a dad, and he's so good. I mean, he even sings really well. Everybody's good.
So that was going to be one of my next questions. Did you have much interaction with the cast? Did they feedback? Did the way they sort of play their characters bounce off each other? Did that impact on how you wrote future episodes or seasons?
Totally.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Great. Tell us more.
Well, we were very fortunate. We were talking about this in the voiceover panel, how rare it is anymore to do a recorded show radio style, where you have all the cast together, the ensemble, each with their own microphone, interacting as if it were a radio show and happening in real time. Unfortunately, because of scheduling and as the actors all work constantly, there are like 60 voiceover actors who do everything, and so it's hard to schedule them. It's very hard to schedule 4 or 5 people at a time, so it's sort of become a thing of the past. But we were still doing that. The cast got along great. Some of them were green. It was their first big job. Some of them, like Steve Bloom and Mo, were old hands at this, and it was so sweet to watch. They kind of took the younger guys under their wing and taught them things, and our voice director, Jenny McSwain, did the same with Parvesh, who had never done a voice thing before. We had to be really pulled back. He was incapable of repeating the same read more than once. Which is sometimes good, but other times it's just like, no, you don't have to change it, just do it exactly the same way you said it, just for technical reasons. You don't need to ad-lib anything. So it took him a long time to learn that, but...
it was great fun having everyone in the room together, because they were all trying to crack
And they all became great friends. They hung out together after recording sessions. They still stay in touch on WhatsApp. We have a WhatsApp
chain still going.
Check in every couple of days, and so even they will say too, it's just so rare for that to happen on the show.
Been to each other's weddings, we've been with each other during funerals. I mean, it really is a tight team. Ginny used to joke though, because she didn't like the radio style with these guys, because she felt like she had to be the school teacher. Like, hey, stop it, turn off that phone. But because they were always joking like that, it gave us many ideas for things we do. And even the musical thing, when people started singing in the room, we're like, oh yeah? Okay.
And the switcheroo
episode, because they imitate each other's
voices and bodies, the same thing, because they loved imitating each other and mocking each other.
Well, that's great. I know in previous years at this and other conventions we've had like DC Douglas, Steve Bloom and so on. And I remember them talking about bits and how it was a good atmosphere, and obviously Steve worked on Prime as well, and that was was that a similar situation with the recording?
Yeah, we were doing radio style, at least season 1 for sure, which also was hilarious and great. To see Frank and Peter face each other was just amazing.
Amazing stuff. Okay, do we want to we can maybe go to some questions, I don't know, unless there's anything else particularly... Actually, I'm going to start with one more question from me, otherwise I'll never get to ask these things, and then we'll run around the questions in a sec. The human characters in Rescue Bots, I found personally quite different than a lot of other Transformers shows, because probably most Transformers shows always have that human element. There's often the, like in Transformers Prime, every main bot has their buddy. I grew up with Armada and Unicorn Trilogy, and again, you have the kids and they accompany them on all the adventures. And I think sometimes, I won't comment on which shows, sometimes it works better than others. I think a lot of fans are like, oh, why don't the humans get out of the picture? We just want to see the robots. And I think in Rescue Bots, personally anyway, like the humans, the Burns family, and their pairings are a really good dynamic. How did you write that? Like, what inspired the Burns family and how they got on with each bot?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, what we liked about the Burns family is we felt that they had something to offer the Rescue Bots. And I think that what I enjoy when there are humans in a story with bots is that they give and take each other. They teach each other, or they learn something from each other, or they have something that they're fighting over. They have to have something that means something in that interaction that you want to watch. And so Chief, leading the Burns family, and because the Rescue Bots are actually a service organization back on Cybertron, they understand the ranking, and they all automatically have this respect for Chief. I mean, okay, Heatwave has to be told by Optimus, this is your guy, but I feel like once we had that, we had these teams that had different approaches to the same problem, or sometimes it was the same approach, but like, here's how a Rescue Bot would do it versus a human. And to me, that kept it interesting, because you always would have these different points of view, and characters could grow.
And it is interesting, because some of them were the same. Some, like Blades and Danny, were kind of the opposite. She loves to fly, he was afraid of it. Chase and Chief both have great respect for the law. Graham and Boulder were so funny, just because they were so cool and laid back, but they know all the engineering stuff. And that kind of was informed by Mara's performance too. I think he's just such a big, friendly guy, that he just such a warm voice. It was nice to write that kind of stuff, just for him being amazed by everything on Earth.
And I know a lot of stuff falls on Cody. That's kind of an in-joke that we have at this point. It seems like there's always a reaction shot of something falling on Cody and act break. But we also tried to make it that he was a capable character who also had something to offer the bots. That he was kind of like their emissary to Earth and could show them the cool stuff that maybe the adults wouldn't. And you never want to get into that place where the kid always has to be rescued. I feel like that's when you start to get to know those characters.
Right. Yeah. And this is just typical of all children's programming, a lot of children's programming. You need that character that the audience can identify with that's their age or a little bit older to sort of be the surrogate. And I think I mentioned yesterday, that was kind of I remember saying, no, we have to have that. At one point they didn't want the humans, and we had to kind of fight for the humans at one point.
This is so random too, but Jeff Klein says that every show is essentially the Scooby-Doo characters. Am I did that right?
No, it's Archie.
The Archies.
And it's true. It's, the Archie archetypes can be transferred to basically any ensemble. Winnie the Pooh, Transformers, any show.
And ideally what it can be is like each of these characters has a certain facet of a single personality. So when you put them all together, they're a fully formed character, which is an interesting approach. Anyway.
That was always just a sideline, because it works for the show too. But on Winnie the Pooh, my theory always was it's all happening in Christopher Robin's head. So that each of these characters is a different aspect of his personality that when put together create a whole character. I think it's the same way. You need those different...
And since Peter plays Eeyore, I feel like that's not too much to
That's it is funny that that's how we met Peter, was when he was playing Eeyore. And he hadn't done Transformers in years. And then we were there the day he got the job as in the movie. He got the Optimus role, because they weren't going to use him for a long time, and the fans went nuts. And they decided to acquiesce. And he came in and he was just like such a good movie.
So happy. And we were so happy.
Awesome. Okay, I think I've got my handy assistant with a microphone. So if you want to stick a hand up if you've got a question. Yeah, do you want to run on there? If we could try and keep them vaguely Rescue Bot related, because obviously we have got another panel with Nicole and Brian tomorrow, so Rescue Bot's impossible.
Yeah, we want to tell our same stories over and
If you're not sick of us, come hang out.
My wee boys love the cartoon. I suppose I'm a big fan of like More Than Meets the Eye, and the only time James Roberts interacts with me on Twitter is to tell me when I've misinterpreted his work. But I think I'm right in saying that there aren't that many Decepticons in it, and there's, war's over. So when you were going into your 4th season, for example, did you say to them, I think we need a Decepticon villain, or did you ask for that, or were you so established you didn't care?
Yeah, in season, we were pretty stringent about not having them. We do have a bit of a naughty-con, a little bit interaction there in season 4 that happens with some tagging, but that was really the extent. And that didn't come from us. That came from, we want to do this crossover character, and that was a Hasbro thing. So yeah, we were still trying to say like, nope, no Decepticons. That's not this show. We're just telling different stories.
And I think it really helped the show. I know it was it was a bridge too far for a lot of Transformers fans, but I think that it really just kept the show grounded in the characters and the rescue, since it is a kids, the younger kids show, rescue, and not fighting. As a writer, and as a viewer and as a writer, I have qualms about fight scenes, about battle scenes, because they don't mean anything. It's the outcome that matters. So you have to, every time you have a fight scene, it has to be something new and different that we haven't seen, and that's just hard to do. It's hard to write, it's hard to draw, it's hard to animate, come up with something original. We were just watching something the other night, and I thought, wow, these are great. What was that? I can't remember, but it was something where the action scenes were just so, oh, I know what it was. I was watching the thing I told you about where you were fighting each other.
We'll figure that out.
But it was great. It was just such a...
It was great. Watch it.
New gags, new ways of doing things. It was really good. So I get it that it was missed, but
I would put an asterisk on that because I do write a lot of fight scenes, and for me, what makes a fight scene interesting, besides the set piece of it all, which is another thing I do. I talked about the natural disaster thing. Whenever I walk into a room, I look at how I would stage a fight scene in it. So I'm always thinking about using the environment for that. And so having a cool environment and then having the characters that are fighting have an emotional reason or connection. Again, it's like, like he was saying, the outcome matters, but the terms that you can do psychologically in a fight, I think, always make them more interesting.
Yeah, and if you do that, that's what makes it interesting. If it's not just... I always go back to that. There's an American movie, what's the name of them? I think where they see the wrestler was in it. Randy...
With the giant ants, then? What are you talking about?
No, where you put on the aliens, you can see them with the glasses, they're everywhere, they're here, they're everywhere.
They live. Thank you.
They live. And then wrestler, what was his name?
Roddy Piper.
Yeah, right. And there's a fight scene in there that lasts like 6 minutes. You know what I'm talking about. And it gets to the point where you're just like, this is ridiculous. Isn't this ever going to end? And they don't do anything really clever. They just knock the hell out of each other for like 6 minutes.
That's when you get popcorn.
And I guess you're like, okay, that happened. And then the plot goes on.
Okay, got a question here. Who's your favorite character and why is it Blades?
Good question.
That's the question.
Switcheroo is one of the funniest episodes of anything I've ever seen. And what made you decide which character would get switched with which? Because I think DC and Marvel doing Cody and Frankie's voices is one of the funniest things I've ever heard.
I think it was just, because the characters are opposites and are already entwined, it became, I can't remember now who switched with who, but the thing, but we switched the voices. How am I going to explain this? We didn't switch voices, we switched the characters. So for example, when Frankie was Chase, right?
Yeah, and Chase swinging his legs very excitedly is one of my favorite images from Rescue
So
Dogs.
he's still using his voice, but talking as if he were Frankie. And the sound people, and I think we got this note a couple of times, why don't you do it so that it's actually, the actress's voice coming out of Chase? And it's like, no, that's not Griffin Rocket, it's not fun. Yeah, it's just like, we've seen that. It's better because they can imitate each other. So.
And we would have the one actor read the line and then the other one read it similarly too. So that kind of helped as well for that cadence or where the breath fell. And we have that script down at your signing if you want to come over and look at it, because it's super long, because there's lots of details in there and it's very confusing as to whose line it is.
Oh, it drove our voice director crazy. Ginny's a little high-strung sometimes anyway, and that was just like the last straw.
I think she said at the end of that day, I'm going to kill you.
Who's he sounding like now?
She would pull scripts over and give us letter grades on them, and that day she just slides by a script over and puts F.
I'm glad you like that episode. It's one of my favorites too. That and the Cades, 5 Cades is one of my favorite episodes too.
Yeah, and I will say, one of the reasons that Blades is like top tier there for me is Parvesh. He made that character so fun.
And writing for Chase was fun too, because he just is so, in his thing. It's always fun to write.
Okay, another question? Oh, loads of hands going up.
Thanks. I just want to sort of ask you a quick question about the tone of it. You've talked about it being this bridge show. I'm sure I'm not alone in being someone whose children watched it. It was their introduction to Transformers. They absolutely adored it, my oldest daughter especially. And so, for a start, how did you kind of define that tone and work out what was suitable and what wasn't? But also, do you think that as a lot of TV and animation seems to be moving away from the old sort of network model into kind of streaming, whether finding those kind of bridge shows is going to be easier or more difficult, do you think, going forward?
That's interesting because generally cartoons are tied to toy sales, and that is why they try to target a certain age bracket and sell to that. But with the streaming, sometimes you don't have that anymore, and it gives that great freedom. For us, when we're writing, we never write down to kids. We write something that we want to see, that we think is funny. We want kids to be able to understand, but we don't want to dumb it down ever. And so some people would say that our show actually slides up or bridge, like it's, and that's why I think that you can still watch it happily as an adult, because there's lots of references in there for you. Tonally, they pull us back. They ever felt like something got too scary or too graphic, but by the end, they really trusted us. I know I got a couple notes that the aliens might be a little too scary in the first episode of season 4.
Yeah.
Did I say it all? Sorry.
No, I mean, everything I had to say, I was going to say something different. Oh, the Gray Man. That was the one with the action.
That's the action sequence you
saw
saw. Sorry.
With Ryan Gosling. I don't know if you've seen it, but they came up with some really inventive Jason Bourne kind of action sequences.
Also, Everything Everywhere All at Once. Those are some great fight sequences.
Okay, we've got another question. Do you want to come to one over here? We've still got another 5-10 minutes, we can try and fit a couple more in.
Hiya, thank you.
Hiya.
So you're mentioning a little bit earlier, like Hasbro says this, Hasbro said that, Hasbro wants this, but you're saying like all of these moments, like a lot of it just came from kind of back and forth between the voice actors or just cool ideas you came up with. Like, how much is like the character influenced by the commercial side of selling toys? Like, every TF series has the Bumblebee, the Kid Appeal character, Blades in this case, I'm sorry, works over there. How much of like freedom do you get versus having to make something which makes a profit in toy sales or in adverts or whatever? And if I could just put this on the end as well, if I may, why is the end credit scene to Rescue Bots so, like the music, why is it so intense?
Why does it go so hard?
I don't know.
Thank you. I think we just liked the music. I think that's why we're like, we have to use this piece. We love it so much. But as far as toys, that's a great question because at the beginning of each season, we'd sit down with the team over in Rhode Island and they'd say, here's what we'd like you to put in the show that we're going to make. And sometimes we were just baffled by that and how it would possibly fit in story, but we made it work. And then sometimes I was so frustrated that they packaged Blades and Dr. Morocco together for some reason to sell them, and I'm like, do you not understand? This is a hero and a villain, and everybody else is just heroes. And so I decided to write an episode to explain why that might have happened. If you recall that Dr. Morocco takes over Blades there for a bit.
We really had to convince Hasbro to make a Danny toy that they didn't, for some reason they just don't, they think, oh, girls' toys won't sell. Girl figurines, and they did, and they just, I don't know.
Yeah.
It was always a tough sell getting anything female into the show.
We had the mobile, we were talking about this. I can never remember the name of the mobile transport unit, maybe that's it. We had the ship tender, High Tide was also an ask, and we had the car carrier that Optimus drives that the rescue bots ride in. Which
Oh, I remember that. I remember
Hey,
thinking, that is a toy push, right? I remember watching it like,
Right.
oh, why is Optimus going through that?
Well, one thing also, this is like a sidebar really fast too, I just wanted to say, I don't have the artwork, and maybe I'll put it on Twitter so you can see, but I should shout out to our animation team in Vancouver that was doing the animation for Rescue Bots. On seasons 3 and 4, we were with DHX, and everybody loved that show there too, that was working on it and put in so much love, and for fun, they would draw like hilarious images from our show. I have one of Mayor Lusky in his bed. It's just like the scene from The Godfather, and there's the mechanical bullhead there. He's like screaming. And so they would do all of these things. You'd go in and we'd visit and we'd see them all on the wall. And I was like, oh, it's so great to be collaborating with you.
And one of our designers, our prop designers, Jerry Regan, on the show, designed these movie posters as if they were old movies. Rescue Bots episode is old movies. You just posted that, didn't you?
Yeah, I just posted that. If you can check it out on Twitter.
He did some great stuff.
Because we love to make these references. It's just a lot of fun.
Amazing. Okay, we've got time for maybe one or two more questions. We go down this end.
So, how did you make up all the characters?
So originally when we started out, we were given these toys that were the Rescue Bots, and they were prototype toys, and they were heavy, and they were just one color. And we were told that these are the humans that they partner with. They've done a little bit of that. And we just had names and we had designs, and we're like, well, we're going to kind of do our own thing, but the bots had to be these specific vehicles. And everything else we basically made from whole cloth. And when you're sitting down to develop a show, one of the things you want to do is develop characters that have different perspectives, that are at odds with each other, that keep it interesting when they interact. And all have a different voice. You could tell if you read the dialogue on the page that it was a different person. And so that's what we were thinking about when we're building this world. And then there's something else called story mileage. And it's basically like the driver of how your series is going to generate more stories as you go. Sometimes you'll get a show and you're like, well, I've told 6 stories and I think I have nothing else to say in this world. We were very lucky that Rescue Bots had a great story engine and gave us lots of mileage.
You have like a minute.
So we got lots of auditions when we were casting Rescue Bots, and we read many fantastic actors for the role, and it's such a hard thing. I don't know if you guys were at the record panel the other day, or talking about voices. It's such a hard choice, because you have so much talent, and you're finding the voices of the characters, and you have to select characters that have different voice ranges. If you listen to Rescue Bots with your eyes closed, you'll be able to see that they each kind of hit a different kind of pocket, and that's a lot of characters on screen at the same time that have to sound different. So I did bring along some of the original auditions that we got from Rescue Bots, and I will play them, but I require kind of a promise from you, because these are artists that have not been hired for what they've done, so I'd ask you to please not record or share these, because it's very personal. And so, but I can play them if you're all okay.
LeVar kind of really captured that kind of intensity and manicness, but also just this joy of invention.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. That's really great. I think we'll take one more question and then we'll have to close the panel, unfortunately, so one last question.
Hello. What would the human characters between Rescue Bots and Prime interact with each other and their robot counterparts?
You just say that again, maybe?
Sorry. How would both the robots and humans from both Prime and Rescue Bots interact with each other?
How would the...
Ooh, that's interesting. I mean, it's only headcanon for me at this point, but I think that the kids would get along famously with Cody. I think that, Mika would want to ride in Blades for sure. And I kind of feel that if the Rescue Bots came to Nevada, what would that be like? Because they're not actually warriors. That's the funny thing, you know? Well, we know that, Blades would just be so happy to be with Bumblebee, obviously. Originally, we had it that he had a poster of Bumblebee up. So we weren't allowed to do that it's so strange that the rules that we have with broadcast is that, it might be advertisement if he has a picture of Bumblebee, so he just talks about him a lot. But yeah, I feel like Ratchet wouldn't have a lot of patience for them, although medically, Blades is our medic. I don't think those two would get along super well. But yeah, no, that's a great idea. I'd love to read that crossover.
Amazing. Okay, unfortunately we're out of time, guys. As mentioned, Nicole and Ryan will be in another panel tomorrow, so do check that out. They're on stage every day. It's great. We love to see it. So thank you so much. Can I get a big round of applause, please? For Nicole and Ryan. Thank you so much.
I just want to shout out to our AV guys who made this possible. Thank you very much, guys.